Back in Unit 1, I talked about the three levels of Chaucerian irony, the three different ways we can read Chaucer's deliberately faux naive narrator and how he's treating how he's describing the pilgrims around him. Now I want to talk about three interpretive strategies for reading Swift. It's more like two levels of irony and one level of fun. Swift, though extremely funny, is not nearly as warm-hearted as Chaucer is when Chaucer's feeling warm-hearted. Now, many of you have encountered just part one of Gulliver's Travels before, as video, as a cartoon, as children's entertainment, and all the emphasis was on the delightful, fanciful little people. That's all fine. That's great. That is the first level. We can enjoy the sheer imagination, the flight of fancy that Swift is taking in describing these tiny people and what it's like to be a giant among them. I would say it is interesting to look at the moment where Gulliver's pockets are searched and a moment of what literary theorists call defamiliarization, where the Lilliputians try to describe what they found in the Man Mountain's pockets, where they're trying to, like, okay, the snuff box is a huge chest, and they breathe and they're sneezing. They with great difficulty open up his journal and find writing, which is the letters are the size of the palms of their hands. They're amazed at the sheer size of his money, and things, because they're so large, are coarse and not as fine. So his handkerchief looks to them, which is, fairly well-made English linen, looks to the Lilliputians like very coarse sailcloth, ragged, very rough, where everything the Lilliputians make is small and, of course, very finely detailed. Great. So there's the level of fun. This is also very much a topical satire, and your footnotes their endnotes really, want to tell you about this, that Swift is making fun of particular figures, particular movements, particular institutions of his day, that there's speculation about which ridiculous, badly behaved minister in the Lilliputian court corresponds to which badly behaved minister in the British court. It's very clear that he's making fun of particular religious parties, dissent, things like that. And this is interesting if you are interested in the history. It is topical humor that is extremely relevant to the politics of the first quarter of the 18th century in England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. You may not be so interested in it. There's a third level. I will get back to that. Simply on the level of being ridiculous, here in chapter 3 is the Emperor of Lilliput's style, the actual official way proclamations from the Emperor of Lilliput begin. Golbasto momoran avlame gurdilo shefin mali aligu, most mighty Emperor of Lilliput, delight and terror of the universe, whose dominions extend 5,000 brustrokes, about 12 miles in circumference, to the extremities of the globe. Monarch of all monarchs, taller than the sons of men, whose feet press down to the center, and whose head strikes against the sun, at whose nod the princes of the earth shake their knees, pleasant as the spring, comfortable as the summer, fruitful as autumn, dreadful as winter. His most sublime majesty proposeth to the Man Mountain, lately arrived to our celestial dominions, the following articles, which by solemn oath he shall be obliged to perform. I want to stop right there. We were on page 43, by the way, part 1, chapter 3. The name is silly. Go past over to Sheffrin Mully Ully Goo is not a name to be said with a straight face. There's a level of just simple humor here. There's also stuff like when they make Gulliver swear, first he has to swear according to his own country, and then he has to swear according to theirs, where he holds his right foot in his left hand, and he puts his right hand here like this, and then he swears, and this is meant to be just silly and goofy. There's a level of sheer goofy humor here too, but a heavier irony, like It is the Emperor of Lilliput is noticeably taller than the other Lilliputians by about a 14th of an inch, Gulliver tells us. Gulliver is a meticulous measurer of things. He's a quantifier of the world around him. In this, he is reliable. It's like a quarter of an inch. 14th, not a 12th of an inch, not a 16th of an inch, a 14th of an inch taller than the rest. Okay, but the idea that he's the arrival of a 6-foot tall person in the Emperor of Lilliput's domain has not hurt his self-love at all. He still views himself as this giant, this mighty titan of the universe, or that's how all kings and queens like to be called. And there's the absurdity of giving a proclamation to a giant that's about the king's height. There's a kind of failure to cope with reality, which on one level is the third level of Swift's irony, that he moves beyond the particulars. You may not care about the Whigs because they aren't even a political party anymore. You may not care about the Tories of 2019, let alone the Tories of 1719. But there is something happening. There's a mockery of general human vanity and widely spread follies. Satire aims at folly. And Swift, though he's got very specific targets, goes for very general targets. Who is the Emperor of Lilliput meant to be in 18th century England? Besides being like George I, he is described as having like the Habsburg lip and nose. So maybe he's George I. You don't have any. Are you angry at George I? I don't even get angry with the Georges till 3. I skipped the early part of the series. But that vanity, where the king wants to rant about how tall he is, despite the fact he's talking to a giant, and nothing will penetrate this egomania, that is evergreen. You can apply it to people today if you want to. You don't have to. I don't particularly want to. Because the thing is, there will be more people to mock for exactly this vanity and folly in the future. If you're waiting, don't worry. We will never come to the last leader who is foolish in the way the Emperor of Lilliput is. And this is the third level of Swift satire, where he moves us to mocking things that are generally and universally, or at least broadly human, easily recognizable. I want to talk in part 1, chapter 4, on pages 47 and 48. We talk about, first of all, the faction at home, between the Tremexen and the Slemexen, the high heels and the low heels. These are the Whigs and the Tories. And this is also ridiculous. We're making key, at the time, very pointed party differences that people are fighting over a lot, something absurd where they're fighting over the height of their shoes. And then the Prince of Wales, or the Prince of Wales figure, who can't choose between parties, is wearing a high-heeled and low-heeled shoe and tottering along. Okay, that's absurd. On one line, it seems to be here that the joke is on having these parties, that these differences are trivial and people are fighting about them, where the two parties at the Lilliputian court won't speak to each other, won't eat with each other, forget it, it's serious. But if you thought that was ridiculous, on page 48, we find out about the religious warfare between the big Indians and the little Indians. They're fighting their major religious dispute about which end of the egg you crack the shell open of when you want to eat breakfast. Absurd. And on one level here, clearly the joke is, aren't the kind of religious differences we fight over absurd? This is clearly a distinction between Protestantism and Catholicism. The Blufeskins represent the French, who are still majority Catholic and have a Catholic king. The British are officially, and really they are very much a Protestant country, and they're also at war with the French, not just about religious differences, but about trade and just power politics. Okay, so the difference in England and France becomes the absurd difference between Lilliput and Blefuscu, these ridiculous tiny countries of tiny people who are separated by a narrow channel, we find out when Gulliver wades over to take away the Blefuscan navy. There's a narrow channel between them, like two countries in Europe, I might mention. And then the difference in two strands of Christianity who had been fighting wars with each other for centuries in Europe between the Catholics and the Protestants, is reduced to this trivial dispute between the big ends and little ones. Now, it's easy to say, look, isn't it ridiculous? Catholics and Protestants aren't that different. The Whigs and Tories aren't that different. They fight over petty stuff. And isn't Swift bigger than that? But here's the thing. Swift himself fought fiercely in these combats. The difference between the big end and the little end of the egg is absurd and ridiculous and not worth even raising one's voice over, not worth raising one's eyebrow over. The high heel, low heel thing is just stupid, trivial. But the real world partisan and religious differences that these represent and satirize and mock are things that Swift was deeply invested in. He is a political creature. He is a polemicist, a culture warrior. He does not think that Catholicism and Protestantism are only trivially different. If he were, he wouldn't have been a minister in the Church of England, which he very much was. He loathes the idea of a Catholic power coming. He loathes there's a Catholic branch of the royal family who's been displaced in the Revolution of 1689 that that Swift loathes and despises. He's not in person, he's not above the Whig Tory distinction. He doesn't think it's about high heels and low heels. He hates the Whigs. In fact, a lot of this book is mocking the Whigs. The various ministers with silly names are more or less recognizable Whig politicians. Gulliver is coded as a Whig because of where he went to college, where his hometown is, because of his whole approach to life. Dude, he's a Whig, right? And that's actually one of the reasons he's stupid and gullible and a moron, because he's got the bad Whig perspective. Swift is deeply invested in exactly the trivial distinctions he mocks as trivial. But step back and appreciate that. He is, in his personal life, his professional life, his political life, deeply invested in these disputes. He is one of them. He is not outside them. He is of them. But then as a writer, he can actually step back far enough to mock behavior that he participates in. And he knows he participates in it. He can mock his own behavior. If Swift were alive today, I don't know what he'd think about anybody. Actually, I'd like to see him have a go at various political figures today. I don't know, in a partisan way, you pick which political figures you'd like Swift to mock, and there we go. If he were alive today, he'd be on cable news being extremely mean, or he'd have a TV show. He has sometimes been likened, sometimes by me in an earlier version of his class, to Stephen Colbert. Highly political, full of ironic masks, motivated by a real sense that there's a certain injustice that he needs to poke fun at. He was part of it, but he can mock that triviality today. Today he'd be on cable news starting a fight. But if you were rewriting Gulliver, the talking heads shouting at each other during cable news, debates, rallies, what have you, they would all come in to be made tiny and ridiculous. So the third level of Swift satire includes even his own behavior and moves to a general habit of mind that we should all try to grow out of.